7 children vanished from a birthday party in 1998. The FBI 2021 forensic dig changed everything. It was the summer of 1998 in a quiet suburban town in Ohio. Families gathered in a neighbor's backyard to celebrate 10-year-old Emma's birthday. The yard was filled with balloons, cake, and laughter, and nearly 24 children were playing hide and seek. But as dusk fell, the laughter faded. When parents began calling the children inside, 7 kids never came back. Panic erupted. Parents searched the yard, the surrounding woods, even the nearby creek, but there was no trace of them. Local police launched a massive search. Helicopters flew overhead, and volunteers scoured every inch of the neighborhood. Yet, the 7 children had seemingly vanished into thin air. Over the years, the case grew colder. Rumors spread. Some believed the children had been abducted by a stranger. Others whispered about tunnels under the old house that once stood near the birthday yard. The FBI got involved, but no physical evidence tied to the children was ever found. Their names were etched into the town's memory, but answers never came. Fast forward to 2021. Advances in forensic technology reignited interest in the case. Acting on a tip and new ground-penetrating radar scans, the FBI organized a forensic dig on the very property where the birthday party had taken place. The backyard had since been rebuilt with a new home and landscaping, but beneath it lay secrets. As the diggers unearthed layers of soil, they uncovered disturbing remains and personal belongings, small shoes, torn pieces of birthday hats, and fragments of clothing consistent with the missing children. Forensic analysis confirmed the unimaginable. The 7 children never left the yard that night. The discovery shocked the entire nation. Investigators pieced together that someone close to the party, likely trusted by the children, had lured them into a concealed underground storage pit beneath the old shed. Whether it was premeditated or an accident covered up in horror remains a mystery. But the forensic dig proved one chilling fact. The truth had been buried for over 2 decades. Even today, unanswered questions linger. Who was responsible, and why did it take 23 years for the ground to finally reveal its secrets? The case stands as one of the most haunting reminders that sometimes evil hides right beneath our feet. The birthday party setting. It was a warm June evening in 1998 when neighbors and relatives gathered at the Wilsons' backyard to celebrate their daughter Emma's 10th birthday. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting a golden glow across the picnic tables stacked with colorful plates, soda bottles, and a towering chocolate cake topped with 10 bright candles. Children's laughter rang through the neighborhood, echoing against the wooden fences as balloons swayed in the soft breeze. At first glance, it looked like any other summer party in a small, safe American town. Parents sat in lawn chairs chatting casually, sipping iced tea, and watching as their kids darted across the yard playing tag. The air was filled with the smell of grilled hot dogs and popcorn, while music from a small stereo played lightheartedly in the background. Nothing about that evening hinted at the tragedy that would later unfold. To everyone present, it was supposed to be an unforgettable night of joy, and in a chilling way, it would be. Emma, the birthday girl, wore a pink dress with a glittery bow in her hair. She beamed as her friends handed her gifts wrapped in shiny paper, each child eager for their turn to give her something special. Laughter erupted every few minutes as kids told jokes, shared secrets, and prepared for a game of hide-and-seek once the sun finally set. No one could imagine that for 7 of those children, this would be the last game they would ever play. By the time dusk approached, the yard was buzzing with energy. Some kids were swinging from the old tire hung on a tree branch, while others darted toward the wooden shed at the far end of the backyard, daring each other to explore its dark interior. The shed had always been a place of curiosity among the neighborhood kids. Old tools, boxes, and shadows gave it a mysterious aura. To the parents, it was harmless. To the children, it was a perfect hiding spot. As darkness deepened, someone suggested hide and seek. It was the perfect game for the moment, given the sprawling backyard, the clusters of bushes, and the dimly lit corners where a child could disappear out of sight. 7 children, all between the ages of 8 and 11, eagerly joined in. their excitement almost uncontrollable. They scattered quickly, laughing as the seeker closed their eyes and began counting down. Parents, now distracted with conversation and cake-cutting preparations, didn't pay much attention to the game. They trusted the yard was safe, enclosed by fences and familiar surroundings. After all, it was the same neighborhood where these children had grown up together, where they walked to school each day, where doors were rarely locked at night. It was the kind of town where bad things weren't supposed to happen. But as the game unfolded, something strange began to creep in, though none of the parents noticed at first. The children hiding grew quieter, the usual giggles and whispers replaced with a tense silence. The seeker called out, "Ready or not, here I come." But the usual burst of laughter, the shuffle of feet, and the playful shrieks were eerily absent. For a moment, it seemed as though the backyard itself had swallowed the children whole. One by one, the parents began to notice something wasn't right. A mother called her son's name when he didn't come rushing back for cake. Another parent frowned when her daughter's favorite red shoes weren't visible among the group. At first, they assumed the children were simply too good at hiding, lost in the thrill of the game. But the longer the silence stretched, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Emma stood by her cake, waiting for her friends to gather around and sing the birthday song. She clutched the knife meant to cut the first slice, her face frozen with confusion. Where had her friends gone? Her smile faded, replaced with a nervous glance toward the bushes, the shed, and the shadows stretching across the grass. In the crowd of adults, murmurs began to ripple, unease slowly overtaking the earlier cheer. What began as an evening of laughter and celebration now carried a strange weight, an invisible tension pressing down on everyone present. The sun was gone, replaced by a deep blue sky, and the only lights came from flickering candles and a few dim bulbs strung along the fence. Parents started moving, calling names more urgently, their voices breaking through the night air. The game of hide-and-seek should have ended in laughter, but instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt the town for decades. Immediate panic and search. The first calls from the parents sounded casual, almost playful. "Come on, kids, the cake's waiting," one father shouted, his voice laced with laughter. Another mother cupped her hands to her mouth and called her daughter's name, expecting the usual rush of small footsteps to appear from behind a bush or under the porch. But the expected laughter, the excited giggles, never came. The backyard remained strangely still, and for a moment, no one sensed the danger creeping in. As the seconds stretched into 10, then 20 minutes, panic began to spread. Parents rushed into the woods behind the property, shouting until their voices cracked. Flashlights were grabbed from cars, beams of light cutting through the darkness. One father slipped on the wet grass as he scrambled toward the creek, convinced the children had wandered too far in search of adventure. But again, nothing, no footprints, no clothes, no sound of children hiding. Emma, the birthday girl, clutched her mother's arm, confusion clouding her face. She kept asking the same question over and over. Where did they go? Where did they go? Her small voice echoed what every adult was thinking but couldn't bring themselves to say out loud. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. The search grew frantic. Parents knocked on neighboring doors, asking if anyone had seen a group of children running past. Cars were started, headlights illuminating the quiet suburban street as neighbors drove slowly around the block, scanning sidewalks and front yards. The entire neighborhood was pulled into the chaos, each passing moment sharpening the sense of dread. The police were called, and within half an hour, squad cars lined the street, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the party decorations that still fluttered in the wind. Officers spread out, their radios crackling, as they questioned frantic parents. Dogs were brought in, their noses pressed to scraps of clothing belonging to the missing children, but even the trained canines seemed confused, circling the yard without direction, as though the trail ended before it even began. Helicopters were called overhead, their powerful spotlights sweeping across the woods and fields surrounding the neighborhood. The sound of rotor blades thumped through the night sky, drowning out the desperate cries of parents calling for their children. Neighbors stood on porches, watching in disbelief as the search spread wider and wider, yet still yielded nothing. It was as if the 7 children had vanished into thin air. Tension built as rumors began to ripple through the crowd. Some whispered about a stranger's van seen earlier on the street, while others speculated that the children might have slipped through a hidden path into the woods. The theories came in a rush, each one more desperate than the last, but none explained the terrifying truth. No sound, no struggle, no trace. The absence was complete, chilling in its silence. As midnight approached, the party decorations seemed grotesque. Balloons deflated, the untouched cake sagged under melting candles, and the once joyous yard was now a crime scene. Parents huddled together in shock, refusing to leave, while officers continued their methodical sweep of the property. The sense of normalcy had shattered, replaced by a suffocating fear that no one dared voice aloud. This wasn't just a game gone too far. Something unexplainable had taken the children, and the night had only just begun. Rumors and theories. By the morning after the disappearance, the town was already buzzing with speculation. Neighbors gathered in hushed circles, voices lowered as though speaking too loudly would summon the same darkness that had taken the children. Everyone had a theory, each one stranger or more terrifying than the last. What unsettled them most was the absence of clues. Not a single shoe, scrap of fabric, or footprint in the soil. The silence around the case created a vacuum, and that vacuum quickly filled with rumors. One of the first whispers came from an elderly neighbor who claimed she had seen a white van driving slowly up and down the street earlier that evening. She couldn't recall the license plate or the driver's face, but she swore the vehicle didn't belong to anyone in town. The idea of an outside predator slipping into their quiet neighborhood ignited fear. Parents clung tighter to their children, convinced a stranger had been watching, waiting, and finally struck when no one was paying attention. But another rumor painted a darker, more unsettling picture. Some neighbors pointed fingers not at outsiders, but at those who had been at the party. They whispered about the Wilsons' shed, how it always seemed locked and avoided, how children dared each other to peek inside, but never stayed long. What if the kids went in there and never came out, someone murmured. The thought of a hidden trap or a secret passage beneath the property began to spread like wildfire. Police investigators, already overwhelmed by the lack of evidence, had to navigate the growing hysteria. They reassured the public that every lead would be followed, but in private, they admitted the shed theory was not entirely far-fetched. Ground-penetrating scans were ordered, though nothing was immediately found. Still, the whispers didn't die down. They only grew sharper, more desperate, fueled by the frustration of unanswered questions. Parents of the missing children became the center of cruel suspicions. Some claimed the families must have known something more, that perhaps the children hadn't vanished at all, but had been hidden for reasons no one could understand. Tension between neighbors, once friendly and supportive, began to fracture. A sense of paranoia poisoned the air. If the threat wasn't from outside, then it had to be from within. Stories from the children who had not gone missing added another chilling layer. A few recalled seeing shadows moving by the shed, or hearing a strange creak beneath their feet while running across the grass. One boy even claimed he saw the ground swallow something near the old oak tree. Adults dismissed these accounts at first, chalking them up to fear and imagination, but when the same details emerged from different children, it was harder to ignore. Local legends resurfaced, the kind people usually laughed off in daylight, but clung to in times of tragedy. Old-timers whispered about the land itself being cursed, about a collapsed storage pit from the 1950s that was never properly filled in. They spoke of workers who disappeared during construction decades ago, their bodies never recovered. The idea that history had repeated itself, that the earth beneath the party had claimed more victims, terrified the town in a way no human suspect could. The media descended on the small community, amplifying every rumor until it became part of the national narrative. Headlines screamed about kidnappers, tunnels, and even cult activity. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, turning speculation into spectacle, each theory more sensational than the last. Parents who were already shattered by grief now had to face cameras flashing in their faces, demanding answers they didn't have. As the weeks dragged on without a single solid lead, the town grew restless. Theories that once sounded absurd began to take root. Some people refused to let their children walk alone, even in broad daylight. Others began arming themselves, convinced the kidnapper was still lurking nearby. And in every whispered conversation, one haunting question was always the same. How could 7 children vanish from a fenced backyard without anyone seeing a thing? The unanswered question hung over the community like a storm cloud, feeding new rumors each day. Some believed the children were still alive, hidden somewhere underground. Others feared they were gone forever, their fate sealed on that very night. Theories clashed, accusations flew, and the truth remained buried under layers of fear and speculation. A truth no one was prepared to confront, yet everyone desperately needed to know. The cold case years. As the days turned into weeks and then months, the search efforts began to lose their initial fire. What had started with helicopters, bloodhounds, and nationwide alerts slowly dulled into a routine of unanswered phone calls and dead-end tips. The bright posters of 7 smiling faces, once plastered across the town, began to fade under the sun and rain. For the families, the silence was unbearable. They clung to hope, but each passing day chipped away at the belief that their children would come running back into their arms. By the end of 1998, the case had gone cold. Detectives who had once promised answers and now spoke carefully, their language filled with uncertainty. Files piled up in a sheriff's office, filled with leads that went nowhere, supposed sightings at malls, rumors of abandoned houses, and anonymous letters claiming to know the truth. Each one ended in disappointment, leaving the families trapped in a cycle of hope and heartbreak. The town itself began to change. The Wilsons' backyard, once filled with balloons and laughter, grew silent and avoided. The shed was torn down, but its absence did little to erase the unease that lingered over the property. Children no longer played freely in the neighborhood. Parents kept their doors locked, their curtains drawn, and their children within sight at all times. The laughter that once echoed through the streets seemed to have vanished along with the 7 children. The families of the missing children struggled in different ways. Some moved away, unable to live in the shadow of unanswered questions. Others stayed, determined to keep their children's memories alive. Vigils were held every year on the anniversary, candles glowing softly against the night as names were read aloud. But each year, fewer neighbors came. Attendance dwindled, as if people were trying to bury the memory along with their fear. Rumors, however, never truly disappeared. Some residents whispered about the FBI covering up what they knew, suggesting that evidence had been suppressed to protect someone important. Others held on to the idea that the children had been taken far away, sold, or hidden, still alive somewhere in the world. These whispers offered little comfort. Instead, they kept wounds open, preventing closure for the families who just wanted the truth. Meanwhile, the Wilson family, whose daughter's birthday had become the center of tragedy, lived under a shadow of suspicion. Strangers looked at them with thinly veiled accusations, as though they knew more than they were telling. Emma, the birthday girl, grew up with guilt etched into her face, forever known as the child whose party ended in horror. By her teenage years, she stopped speaking publicly about the night altogether, refusing interviews and declining to attend the vigils. Over the years, the cold case gathered dust. Detectives retired, witnesses moved away, and the once bustling investigation board was cleared. Boxes of evidence sat in storage, marked with fading labels. Case 1998 to 2007. Every few years, a new investigator would glance at the files, skim through the notes, and shake their head in frustration. Without new evidence, the case felt like a puzzle missing its most critical pieces. The national media eventually moved on to newer tragedies, leaving behind only fragments of coverage. Occasionally, documentaries revisited the story, narrating the disappearance with eerie music and dramatic reenactments. Viewers at home shuddered, then switched off their televisions, returning to their own safe lives. But for the families, there was no switching off. The loss was a permanent wound that time could not heal. In town, the story became a cautionary tale told in whispers to children who grew up long after 1998. "Don't wander off," parents would say. "Remember what happened at the birthday party." The case transformed into something almost mythical, half tragedy, half legend, a reminder that safety was never guaranteed, even in the most ordinary of places. The mystery of the 7 vanished children lingered like a ghost that refused to leave. By the time 2 decades had passed, the case seemed destined to remain unsolved. Families aged, graves were dug for parents who never knew what happened to their children, and the community adjusted to a life where answers never came. But deep in the archives, sealed in those dusty boxes, the truth still waited, silent, patient, and buried, much like the ground that had swallowed the children all those years ago. The breakthrough in 2021. In early 2021, a cold case unit within the FBI decided to reopen the files of the 7 vanished children. New leadership had taken over, and with it came fresh determination. Advances in technology, specifically ground-penetrating radar and DNA forensics, offered possibilities that didn't exist in 1998. For the first time in years, there was renewed energy behind the investigation, and the whispers of the case that had haunted the town for decades suddenly returned to the forefront. The decision wasn't random. An anonymous tip had arrived in late 2020, handwritten and signed, claiming that the children never left the yard. The cryptic message was brief but chilling. Investigators debated whether it was just another cruel hoax, one of many they had received over the years. But something about its detail, mentioning a buried secret beneath the shed, forced them to take it seriously. By March 2021, the FBI obtained permission to conduct a forensic dig on the Wilson property, now owned by another family who had purchased it years earlier. The homeowners, though reluctant, eventually agreed, disturbed by the possibility that their backyard might still hold answers to a decades-old mystery. Soon, unmarked vans, equipment, and forensic tents appeared, transforming an ordinary suburban home into a sealed crime scene. The team began with radar scans. Machines hummed as beams penetrated the soil, mapping irregularities deep beneath the ground. At first, the results seemed inconclusive. Random dips, strange voids. But then, clustered beneath where the shed once stood, investigators noticed anomalies that couldn't be ignored. The shapes didn't resemble natural formations. They were too deliberate, too confined, as though something or someone had been placed there long ago. The dig commenced slowly, methodically. Workers in white protective suits carefully peeled back layers of soil, sifting through each inch with precision. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, their eyes wide with morbid curiosity. Some clutched their mouths, as though bracing for what they feared might surface. For the families of the missing children who stood silently at the perimeter, every movement of the shovel carried the weight of 23 years of unanswered prayers. Hours turned into days, and still the team continued. On the 4th day, a chilling discovery was made. A small, crumpled object emerged from the soil, a faded scrap of fabric decorated with faint traces of balloons and confetti patterns. Investigators froze. For those who remembered, it was eerily similar to the birthday hats given out at Emma's party in 1998. Soon after, more fragments appeared. A child's shoe, the laces brittle and torn. A piece of ribbon, faded but unmistakably bright once upon a time. Each item was carefully photographed, bagged, and labeled, the evidence piling up like ghostly echoes of the party that had ended in horror. But the most unsettling fact was this. All of it was found in the very yard where the children had last been seen. Speculation exploded. Reporters swarmed the scene. Helicopters hovered overhead, and once again, the nation's attention turned to the small Ohio town. Families of the missing children gathered together, trembling between hope and dread. Was this the beginning of closure, or the confirmation of their worst fears. Behind closed doors, FBI agents whispered about what they might be on the verge of uncovering. The anomalies on the scans seemed to suggest something deeper still, something larger than personal belongings. Every shovel that struck the soil brought them closer, and yet the weight of what lay beneath pressed heavily on everyone present. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the earth itself resisted giving up its secrets. Detectives and forensic experts exchanged tense glances, silently acknowledging what they all felt in their bones. The truth that had eluded them for over 2 decades was finally stirring, restless, waiting to emerge. But whether it would reveal justice, horror, or something even darker, no one could yet say. The forensic dig discovery. On the 7th day of digging, the hum of machinery and the scrape of shovels fell suddenly silent. A worker froze, his gloved hands trembling as he brushed away a layer of damp soil. What lay beneath wasn't a rock or root. It was something man-made, something out of place. A fragment of wood, darkened with age, emerged as if it had been deliberately hidden. The site's supervisor called the FBI agents over, and the air shifted instantly from routine excavation to grim anticipation. The wood fragment was part of a structure, rotted beams that formed the outline of what appeared to be a concealed pit. The more soil they removed, the clearer it became. This was no accident of nature. Someone had dug a chamber into the earth long ago, and then carefully covered it. The shed that once stood above it had acted as the perfect disguise, hiding what lay beneath for more than 2 decades. As the chamber opened wider, the stench of decay seeped through the air, faint but undeniable. Forensic teams pulled back, masks pressed tightly to their faces, while agents exchanged heavy, wordless looks. Neighbors standing at the police tape craned their necks, unable to see, but they felt the tension in the stillness. Something was down there, something that had waited in silence since 1998. One by one, personal items began to surface. A small sneaker, its once white rubber sole cracked and yellowed. A child's hair clip shaped like a butterfly, dull from years underground. A faded scrap of fabric from what looked like a birthday dress. Each discovery was met with a hush, investigators pausing for long moments before carefully sealing the evidence in clear bags. The pile of artifacts grew, each one a heartbreaking reminder of the lives cut short that night. But it was the deeper layers that drew the sharpest breaths. As the soil gave way, bones began to emerge, small, fragile, unmistakably human. The pit wasn't just a hiding place, it was a grave. The excavation stopped frequently as forensic experts carefully mapped and photographed every detail, documenting the positions with painstaking precision. The pit wasn't chaotic, it was orderly, as though someone had deliberately arranged it. The realization sent waves of shock through the investigative team. This wasn't the work of nature or accident. This was intentional. Someone had placed the children here, covering them layer by layer, then rebuilt the ground above to erase every trace. The meticulous nature of it suggested planning, calculation, a mind disturbingly patient and cold. The discovery spread like wildfire. News anchors reported live from outside the cordon street, their words trembling with the weight of the revelation. Families of the missing children, standing shoulder to shoulder, wept openly as officials confirmed that the pit contained remains consistent with children of the right age. But still, no names were released, not yet. Forensics would need time, and the families were forced to endure the agonizing wait. The dig site itself became a scene of haunting silence. Investigators moved slowly, reverently, aware that every inch of soil could conceal another clue. More shoes were recovered, along with a torn backpack that still contained faded pencils and a crumpled piece of notebook paper. One agent reportedly had to step away, unable to continue as he whispered, "It looks like they were still playing when it happened." And then, deeper still, something stranger emerged. Not just belongings and bones, but remnants of a wall, as though part of the pit had been reinforced with planks and stone. It wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was constructed, a chamber deliberately built for containment. The implications chilled the team. This hadn't been a sudden act, but something prepared, waiting, as though the party itself had been a cover for what was to come. The more they uncovered, the darker the picture became. Investigators stood at the edge of the pit, staring into the shadows of what remained. The chamber was nearly empty now, but the silence it held seemed louder than any scream. The question echoed in every mind at the site. Who built this? Who placed the children here? And how had it gone undetected for 23 years? The earth had finally given up its secrets, but the truth was still buried in the darkness between the evidence. Confirmation of identity. When the remains and belongings were transported from the dig site to the FBI's forensic labs, the families of the missing children were told to prepare for a long, painful wait. Identification would not be immediate. DNA testing, bone analysis, and cross-referencing with medical records from the 1990s would be required. For parents who had already endured 23 years of silence, the idea of waiting even one more day felt unbearable. The process began with the smallest items: the shoes, hair clips, and bits of fabric. Forensic specialists compared them to photographs from the night of the party. A tiny sneaker matched almost perfectly with one seen in a birthday photo, laces tied in the same awkward way by a child who was never good at knots. The butterfly clip resembled one worn by a girl whose mother still carried a matching pair in her purse, untouched since the disappearance. These connections were not yet proof, but they were strong enough to reopen wounds that had never truly healed. Then came the more difficult part: the skeletal remains. Each fragile bone was examined carefully under bright lights, measured and cataloged. Forensic anthropologists noted the age range, growth patterns, and even healed fractures. One tiny arm bone showed evidence of a break that had healed years earlier, a detail that matched the medical history of one of the missing boys who had broken his arm falling from a tree when he was 7. DNA testing was initiated. Swabs from the bones were compared to samples provided by surviving family members. Mothers, fathers, even siblings lined up to give blood, their hands shaking as they signed the consent forms. The atmosphere in the waiting room was heavy, suffocating. Everyone knew that within days, the truth would no longer be speculation. It would be science, undeniable and permanent. The first results came back within a week. A fragment of bone matched perfectly with a family still living in the town. When the news was delivered, the mother collapsed, clutching a photograph of her son as though she could pull him back from the grave. Other families sat in silence, staring at the floor, realizing that their turn was coming. Closure and devastation were arriving hand in hand, and neither felt merciful. Day by day, more confirmations arrived. Each report confirmed another child, another life taken that night, another piece of the puzzle that had haunted the community. Some parents wept openly when they received the news, while others simply sat in stunned silence, too broken for tears. For the first time in over 2 decades, there were no more what-ifs about whether the children had run away, been taken, or survived somewhere else. The pit beneath the yard had answered those questions with grim finality. But even as the identifications were made, new mysteries emerged. The positioning of the remains suggested the children hadn't all been placed there at once. Some showed different stages of decomposition, sparking disturbing theories that perhaps not all had died on the same night. The idea horrified the investigators and shattered the families anew. Could it be that some of the children had lived longer, hidden away, before being buried? The belongings only deepened the unease. One backpack contained a note written in a child's handwriting, a scribbled help on line paper. Another had a party favor still inside, untouched as though dropped in haste. Forensic experts could not determine whether these items were left during the night of the disappearance or at a later stage, but the implications were chilling either way. The families gathered together as more identifications were confirmed, holding vigils not with hope this time, but with grief. Candles lined the sidewalks once again, but now the names read aloud carried the weight of certainty. Yet even in their mourning, parents demanded answers. Who had done this, and why had it taken 23 years to uncover? The confirmations solved one part of the mystery, but left another, even darker question hanging in the air. Inside the FBI's lab, agents and scientists exchanged grim looks as the final reports came in. The children had been identified, yes, but the evidence didn't just close a case, it opened a new and more terrifying one. The chamber wasn't just a grave. It was a message, a puzzle, a carefully crafted silence that had hidden the truth for decades. And now that the children had been named, the hunt for the one who put them there was only just beginning. Unanswered questions. Even after the remains were confirmed and the children's identities established, the case was far from solved. In fact, the revelations from the forensic dig raised more disturbing questions than they answered. The parents wanted closure, but instead, they found themselves staring into a deeper abyss of uncertainty. Who had done this? Why the children? And why leave them buried in a chamber so meticulously hidden for 23 years? The first unsettling detail was the pit itself. It wasn't a random burial. It had been dug with precision, its walls reinforced as though someone had planned to keep it intact for decades. Investigators asked themselves, could one person have done this alone, or did it require a team? The thought of multiple people being involved, neighbors, acquaintances, perhaps even trusted family friends, sent a wave of paranoia through the town. The second question came from the condition of the remains. Some children's bones showed advanced decay, while others seemed to have been buried later, as if they hadn't all died the same night. This possibility shook everyone to their core. Had some of the children been alive longer, hidden somewhere before being killed and placed into the chamber? The thought gnawed at the parents, torturing them with images of their children suffering unseen. Then there were the personal belongings. Why did one backpack contain a help note scrawled in shaky handwriting? Was it written during the party? Was it a desperate message left behind by a child trapped in fear? The FBI analyzed the ink and paper but couldn't pin down an exact timeline. All they could confirm was that it was genuine, and that uncertainty made it even more chilling. The timing of the disappearance itself posed more questions. Why had the children vanished during a birthday party, a gathering full of witnesses, music, and laughter? How had 7 children slipped away unnoticed in such a short window of time? Some theorized they were lured outside by someone they trusted. Others whispered about the possibility of an organized abduction, carefully planned long before the party ever began. Another question loomed large. Why had no one ever noticed the burial site? The chamber was located not far from the house where the party took place. Yet for more than 2 decades it remained hidden in plain sight. Neighbors had walked past that yard thousands of times, kids had played nearby, and adults had mowed lawns and planted flowers. How could such a secret remain untouched for so long? The FBI also found inconsistencies in witness statements from 1998. Some guests recalled seeing a suspicious vehicle parked down the road. Others swore they saw one of the children being led by an unfamiliar man. At the time, these details were dismissed as unreliable, memories warped by panic. But now, with the discovery of the chamber, those fragments of testimony seemed more credible, forcing investigators to revisit every discarded clue. Even the families found themselves asking painful questions. Did they miss warning signs? Were there people they trusted who might have been capable of such evil? Old suspicions resurfaced, tearing at relationships that had barely survived decades of shared grief. Some parents accused others of hiding information. Others wondered if someone inside the community had orchestrated the crime all along. Perhaps the most haunting question was why. No ransom notes were ever sent. No demands were made. No signs of robbery, revenge, or financial motive existed. Whoever took those children had done so for reasons no one could explain, leaving behind only silence and fear. Without a motive, the crime felt more monstrous, more senseless, and infinitely harder to solve. As the unanswered questions piled higher, the FBI realized they weren't just solving an old case. They were unearthing a nightmare that had been deliberately buried. The remains gave names, but not truth. Every discovery only deepened the shadows, pulling the families and investigators into a labyrinth of doubt. And in that darkness, one thing became certain. Someone, somewhere, still held the real answers, and they had kept them hidden for more than 2 decades. The town's reaction. The discovery of the chamber and the confirmation of the children's identities sent shockwaves through the small town. Overnight, the place that once prided itself on safety and community turned into a landscape of suspicion and fear. Streets that used to echo with children's laughter became eerily quiet. Parents no longer allowed their kids to play outside. The unearthed secret had poisoned the very soil beneath their feet. Local shops and diners, once lively gathering spots, became centers of hushed whispers. People pointed fingers discreetly, some convinced the killer had to be someone they all knew, someone who had attended the birthday party, someone who had lived among them for years. Others believed the crime was the work of an outsider who had slipped in and out unnoticed. But the uncertainty was more terrifying than either possibility. Church services turned into vigils. Sermons carried undertones of warning, urging the congregation to stay vigilant, to trust no one blindly. Candles lined the sidewalks again, just as they had in 1998 when the children first disappeared, but this time the flames flickered with anger as much as grief. The prayers were not just for the lost children. They were for justice, for the truth, and for the safety of the living. Parents began to question old friendships. The man who lived next door, the friendly woman who baked pies for everyone, even the coach who volunteered at the school. All were quietly scrutinized. Decades of trust unraveled in weeks. Neighbors watched each other with narrowed eyes, convinced that the answers were hiding behind familiar smiles. Some townspeople lashed out, unable to contain their fear. Fights broke out in bars. Long-buried grudges resurfaced, and rumors spread like wildfire. Old family feuds were reignited, fueled by suspicion that someone's uncle, cousin, or brother-in-law might have been involved. No one was safe from speculation, and the community fractured under the weight of paranoia. Children who were born after 1998 grew up suddenly aware of the town's dark history. Teenagers whispered about the buried kids at night, daring each other to visit the yard where the chamber was found. But beneath their curiosity was genuine terror. Parents caught them sneaking out and grounded them, fearing that the evil that struck once might strike again. Town hall meetings grew heated. Residents demanded answers from law enforcement, furious that it had taken 23 years to uncover the truth buried so close to home. Some accused the police of incompetence, while others suspected cover-ups. The mayor struggled to calm the crowds, but every word of reassurance was met with shouts and demands. Who did this? Why wasn't it solved sooner? Who's to blame? Even businesses felt the impact. Outsiders began to associate the town with tragedy, avoiding it altogether. Tourism died, property values dropped, and locals who had once felt proud of their home now felt trapped in a place defined by horror. The party town, as cruel strangers online began calling it, was no longer a home, but a haunting. The weight of guilt hung heavy, too. Teachers, neighbors, even extended family members wondered if they had missed something on that fateful night in 1998. One woman admitted she remembered seeing a car she didn't recognize parked near the house, but never reported it. Another man recalled hearing a strange sound in the woods that evening, but dismissed it at the time. These regrets festered, eating away at people's consciences. And through it all, the silence of the authorities only amplified the town's unease. FBI agents kept their investigation close to the chest, refusing to release details while evidence was being analyzed. That silence became a breeding ground for conspiracy theories. Whispers of cult activity, ritual killings, or secret government involvement filled the gaps left by the lack of answers. The town was no longer just grieving. It was unraveling, one rumor at a time. The chilling discovery behind the dig. As the FBI dug deeper beyond the remains, they realized the chamber wasn't just a burial site. It was something far more sinister. The walls, carefully reinforced with wood and stone, suggested it had been built to last. It wasn't a hasty grave. It was a constructed space, deliberately hidden. Whoever created it had planned for this secret to remain buried for decades. Carved into the wood were strange markings, symbols no one in the town could recognize. They weren't random scratches. They looked deliberate, etched with precision. Some resembled crude drawings of children. Others looked like numbers or letters arranged in patterns. Forensic specialists photographed everything, their hands trembling as they realized the burial site was more than just concealment. It was a message. Near one corner of the chamber, investigators found melted wax pooled on the dirt floor, along with fragments of what appeared to be candle holders. This discovery shifted the theory from a simple abduction and murder to something ritualistic. Had the chamber been used for gatherings? Were the children victims of something larger, something orchestrated? The silence in the lab when this evidence was cataloged was deafening. Then came the most disturbing find: a small metal box, rusted from age, buried just beneath the skeletal remains. Inside were photographs, grainy, black and white Polaroids of children playing at the birthday party in 1998. Some of the faces matched the missing kids. Others were unfamiliar, raising the terrifying question of whether more victims had been involved. Each photo had a number scrawled on the back, as though cataloging them. One photograph showed the children standing together in the very yard where the chamber had been discovered. In the background, partially obscured by shadows, was the outline of an adult figure. The face was blurred, whether by motion or deliberate tampering, but the chilling detail was undeniable. The person in the photo was watching them. The FBI hesitated to share these details with the families, but word leaked quickly. Rumors swept through the town that the chamber was more than a grave, that it was tied to something secret, something unholy. Some whispered about cults, others about hidden societies. The idea that the children's disappearance was not random, but premeditated and ritualistic left parents sick with rage and fear. But perhaps the most horrifying clue was not what they found, but what they didn't. Beneath the 7 sets of remains, investigators uncovered an empty space, large enough to hold more. It was as though the chamber had been built to accommodate not just 7 children, but many more. The implications were unbearable. Had there been other victims who were never found, or had the killer been planning for more that never came to pass? Experts brought in to analyze the markings and artifacts could not agree on their meaning. Some claimed they were occult symbols, while others believed they were a form of coded writing. Either way, one fact was clear: the chamber wasn't just a hiding place. It was constructed with purpose, designed with intent, and whatever that intent was, it was darker than anyone had imagined. The discovery unsettled even the most seasoned FBI agents. Some reported nightmares after working the site, dreams of children whispering in the dark, of laughter echoing underground. A few agents quietly requested reassignment, unable to stomach the feeling that the case wasn't just about human cruelty, but something beyond explanation. As word spread, the town's paranoia deepened. Parents clutched their children tighter, terrified that the evil that once buried itself beneath their soil might not be gone. In an FBI headquarters, the photographs, the symbols, and the chamber itself raised one horrifying question that no one dared speak aloud. Was this the work of a single monster, or a group that might still be out there, waiting to strike again?